In this video, we're going to talk about relationships. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the user relationship to the service request, and we're going to start off with the basics, view how this works in Orchestrator, and move to some more advanced real-world scenarios a little bit later on. So if we go back to looking at what the service request management pack looks like, or class looks like, we can see that there are a number of relationships that relate to users, and we already kind of know this. When we create a service request or an incident, we always have the affected user, we have the assigned user, so the user that the service request is assigned to. We will have a user who closed the service request, and we also might have it that the service request has been requested on behalf of someone else, like a PA has requested on behalf of a partner. So we've got the requested by user. So we've got all this kind of information here. And going forward, we might want to add some more kind of relationships to users, so that when we're creating a new Active Directory, we may want to have the manager, so a user who's the manager. We may want to have a user who is the PA. We may want to have a user that's kind of have access to this person's mailbox. So we need to understand how we can extract this information in Orchestrator. And anything that's to do with a relationship, or shown as a relationship here in the class browser, we can set up the relationship in Orchestrator to extract it. So let's start off by doing our basic example. So we come back to Orchestrator. We can see our original service request. So we've got our initialized data, which sends across, if you remember rightly, the GUID of the service request. We extract the service request object from Service Manager, and then we've used some of the properties that are in here to create our new user. Now if we come into here and we look at all the properties that are available, we can see that we don't actually see any of the relationships. All we see are properties. So we don't see in here the assigned user or the affected user. And that's because this can only be filtered on physical values. It can't look at relationships, because as I mentioned before, when you're creating a relationship with a user, you're creating a relationship between one management pack and another management pack. And this can only really handle properties. So extract relationships in Orchestrator by using the relationship object. So we now need to configure our relationship. So we go in to look at the properties of the relationship, our connection to Service Manager. The object class, this is going to be the class of the parent object, the object that's kind of like contains the relationship. So as we can see here, the class here is going to be the service request. So it's going to be this service request here, that's the root object. And we need to give a reference to that object. So that reference is going to be, as we've used many times before, its GUID, which is known as the SC object GUID. Now the related class is the relationships that are expected to come out of this. And so we know the relationships that we're after are the user type ones. So what this is going to do is it's going to retrieve all relationships that related between the service request class and the user class. So we're going to expect it to return anything where there's a user and a relationship. So this is going to retrieve the relationship. What we need to do now is retrieve the user object, or the user configuration item. So we pick this up by getting get object. And these are going to be our users. Connection back to Service Manager. The class is going to be domain user and group, and we are going to get where the object SC group I forgot to link it. I need to link it first. Is the related class GUID. Related object GUID. So we're going to pass through the service request, the full service request here, which is going to contain relationships to users. We're going to come here and we're going to get all the relationships that contain users and groups. And then we're going to populate multiple instances of this user object. Now we can demonstrate this by checking it in. Coming to our service portal and creating a service request. So we come back to Orchestrator. Okay, so it's finished with a warning and it's failed on the create user. And that's because the user already exists. Now, if we look at this, we can see this is kind of like a review of what's happened. The initialized data, fine. There we've got our service request, fine. Get our relationship. We've got two user objects. And the reason why we've got two user objects is, as I said, when we create the relationship, we're creating the relationship between the service request and the user object. We're going to retrieve in every single instance of that kind of relationship. To make this easier, what we're going to do is we're going to rerun this in the runbook tester, and we're going to actually see a little bit more detail what's happening. Now we can do that by taking the GUID of that service request, and we can rerun this many times by going to our runbook tester. And hopefully this will make it a little bit more easier to understand. Pop our GUID into our tester. Okay, we'll ignore the fact that the create users failed because we kind of understand why that's going to happen. So we come to our get relationship. We can see that there's two objects that have been created. If we scroll down, we can look in our related class and we can see that the original object was service request, makes sense. We've got our related class, which is what we were filtering on, which is the domain group. And then we've got the relationship class, and we can see here that it's brought back two relationships, the affected user and the created user. Now, if we went actually back to our service request, so we go back to our service manager and have a look at failed service requests because we know it failed. This was the one that was created, the SR250. We just go in here. We can see, if we look at the extensions, this was the test one I created in the service portal a moment ago. Okay, so we have an affected user. We don't have an assigned to user, so let's just create an assigned to user in here. And we'll create Mr. Test User as the assigned to user. We go back to Orchestrator and go back to a runbook tester again. You can now see that there's three users that have come up, again ignoring the create user part of this. So there's three user relationships, and that's because I've created another relationship. So let's just go and have a look in our get relationship. And look at the related class. We can now see we have an assigned to user and a created user and an affected user. Once more, back to Service Manager. Okay, I'm going to now close this service request. Come back to our runbook tester. And lo and behold, we now have 4 user objects. We get the details. There we go, the close by relationship. So every time a relationship is created between an object and the service request, we will get an instance of that every time. This is obviously useful because now we've been able to retrieve every single relationship that has come through relating to users. However, I'm actually only interested here in the affected user. So let's go back to our main book. So I'm going to rerun this, rename this. So for the purposes of this runbook, I'm only interested in that affected user. Affected. And what I don't really want is to get 4 objects coming through here. That's going to end up creating 4 instances of my create user. So what we need to do is we need to place a filter on this link here to say, okay, you get relationship. It's got me all my relationships with my user object, but I want to filter that. So the only one that I'm going to use is my affected user. So we're going to come to the link. What we're going to do is we're going to exclude from the relationship class anything that does not equal affected user. So what we're going to say is we're going to exclude it. If you do not equal affected user, then this way the only thing that should pass through is affected user. So we go back to our runbook tester, hit run, and now we've got our affected user. If you look at the details of this, we can see the display name's administrator, the domain's into. There's not a huge amount of details about this particular user, but we've now got the name and the information about that specific user, and we've extracted that. So if we want to say retrieve the created by user, what we need to do is find the get object. So we're going to have this as our get object, and it's going to be a user, a domain user. And we're going to rename this created by user. We need to get the objects. So that's the relationship related class object. And what we can do here is we're going to filter on related relationship class does not equal created by user. Takes to a runbook tester. We can now see we've got a get relationship, and now we've got our 2 instances of our created by user and our affected user. And these are probably the same. So just to prove this works, the created and affected user are the same people, just to show that we're definitely getting different relationships. A moment ago you saw in the service manager I assigned it to a test user. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this to the assigned user. Just rename that. Assigned by user. If we look at our classes, we can see that there is an assigned to user. That's why it's good to use the authoring tool, so we make sure we get the spellings exactly right. We come to our link and we're going to say exclude everything that is not assigned to user. Just tidy this up. And come to our runbook tester, hit go. Right, so we look at our affected user, you'll remember that was administrator. If we look at our assigned to user, we can see, there we go, that it's our test user. So we're now getting all this kind of information, we're extracting these relationships from Service Manager. And this is going to become important in the next video when we show how we're going to start to add specific users to a service request to carry out certain aspects. And it will get slightly more complicated. But we're also going to use relationships in other ways as well. We'll create relationships between configuration objects and between activities as well. So relationships are kind of like a key part of the whole orchestrator and service manager aspect. Thank you for watching this video.